Вітаємо вас, пане Микола.
Welcome, Mykola. At the second stage of the selection to the High Qualification Commission of Judges of Ukraine, at the interview stage. The interview is conducted by the Commission in its full composition: Stephen Markman, me, Ivan Mishchenko, Serhiy Verlanov, Yevhen Mezentsev, Zazachny, and Robert Brookhuizen. I have not forgotten anyone, I hope. The reporters at your interview are Stephen Markman and Serhiy Verlanov. So, Mykola, I hope that you're already well acquainted with the process, but nevertheless, let me repeat it. Let me repeat the rules. The commissioners will ask you questions. The request is to provide concise answers to the core of the matter because the time is limited. The commissioner asking questions shall be entitled to limit the time of your answer. In case the interview is interrupted as a result of some technical reasons, we will definitely reschedule it and conclude it at some other time and some other day, and definitely we will agree on the day. Before we start with the Q&A session, you will have a chance to tell about your motivation, to explain why you have decided to apply for this competition, about your ideas related to the HQCJ or the judiciary in general, or to tell any other thing you would like to say. Let me give the floor to my colleague. Stephen, Serhiy, you're welcome.
Good morning, Professor. We appreciate your participation in the competition. Thank you very much. Let me briefly introduce you, although I don't know that I can do it too briefly, but I'll do my best. Professor Khavroniuk has been a practitioner of the law for 39 years. To break that down, he has been for 10 years a military prosecutor, for 6 years a lecturer at the National Academy of Security Service, for 7 years a chief scientific expert for the Verkhovna Rada and head of its Department of National Security, Defense, Law Enforcement, and Crime Prevention. For 6 years, Professor Khavroniuk has been head of legal support for the Supreme Court of Ukraine. For 11 years, he's been a professor of criminal law and procedure at National University. And for 11 years, he has also been an individual entrepreneur. That is all. But he is also married and has a grown son. He's involved as a member of the board of many civil society organizations. He has many writings, manuals, manuscripts, articles, books. He has prepared many tests for judicial competitions. And last but certainly not least, he is a co-author of a new criminal code of Ukraine. If I've missed something, Professor, I apologize, but I hope that gives a good introduction for the people who are watching this and for others who are interested in our competition. So if you would please take advantage of what our chairman has offered you, several minutes to further introduce yourself and describe your motivation, that would be appreciated, and this would be the time to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, dear commissioners. Good morning to everyone who can see me now. I'd like to start with saying that probably I'm one of the few candidates who have watched a lot of interviews. And in particular, to be more specific, I have watched 25 interviews, probably not in full because I skipped the points that were related to declarations and other things. I was interested in those interviews as a lecturer, first of all, because on the basis of these interviews, I have something to tell my students. And in particular, I'm going to tell them that please try to preserve your honor since your young age if you want to one day in your life participate in such competitions and not to be blushed and ashamed. And I'm also interested in those interviews as a civil society organization, and I'm monitoring this process of the interviews. It was a pleasure for me. I was pleasantly surprised to hear the answers of a lot of candidates, and I hope that this reform will be a success. As far as myself is concerned, Stephen has been right in providing the main information about myself. The only thing I would like to add is as follows. I really started in the military justice field. It was a kind of a battery for me. I started with, I worked in the prosecutor's office, and I had to work late hours. And on Sunday, like up till 10 in the evening, and on Sunday, I had to work till 6. And I would say that I got accustomed to that schedule, and I've been working all my life long at that pace. I tried to do a lot of things. In the Academy of the Security Service, I presented my PhD. I learned to become a lecturer. Then I went to the Verkhovna Rada staff. I learned how to work with highly important documents there, draft laws. And in fact, I was the head of one of the departments. That was the department responsible for draft laws related to the legal reform, in particular judicial reform. That's why it was absolutely logical that 7 years later I went to the Supreme Court, where I was the head of the legal department. And at the same time, I was deputy head of the staff of the Supreme Court of Ukraine and the representative of the Supreme Court in the Constitutional Court. I also was a secretary and then the chairman of the Scientific Consultative Board. And we established the new council with the new rules, I would say, and it has been functioning since that date, following the new rules. It was also back then that I got some negative experience of participation in the staff commission. And I had two interesting trips to the National School of Judges of Portugal, where I got very interesting experience. And I also went to some of the courts of Germany, in particular in Bavaria, where I also saw the way justice is administered there and learned a lot. Over the recent 11 years, besides the university, I have also been working for the NGO, CSO Center. This is the Analytical Organization Center of Political and Legal Reform, and I was also one of the experts of the resuscitation package of reform. Now it's a union, the association, but back then when I worked for it, it was a platform only. And I dealt there with the anti-corruption direction, and of course, within this framework of activity, I also dealt with courts. Do I still have 1 more minute? Because I would still like to tell about the judicial reform in brief. If not, then please just stop me. So I made a conclusion for myself concerning the legal reform that there can be no miracles in reform. Everything is taking place step by step, and in order to be a success, you need to set the right final objective you're striving to accomplish. And our goal within the judicial legal reform is timely and fair justice administration. And it is following this objective that we are trying to build the interim objectives. For example, the first interim objective is institutional development. The second one is staff provision. The third one is legislation. And the fourth one is due control. And it is within those objectives that we predetermine the tasks and specific measures we need to take. It's only in that way that we can be moving forward within the reform in order to accelerate it. If we speak about staff provision, we should start speaking with adequate education at law schools. We should speak about majoring of courts, specialization of courts. That's what you're actually asking everyone about. I mean, integrity, how to ensure integrity of judicial candidates and what integrity stands for. So, and now let me make a pause because I can see that my time is actually over for this introductory speech. Thank you.
Judge Verlanov.
Доброго дня, пане Микола. Дуже дякуємо за участь в цьому конкурсі.
Thank you, Mykola. Thank you for participating in the selection process. So my question is as follows. You have already introduced yourself, and Stephen has already informed us about. You are quite a well-known law scholar in Ukraine. You are also participating in the judicial reforms held in Ukraine. What do you think about the following? Taking into account the reforms that have been implemented, why do we keep hearing it today from the civil society that the trust in the judiciary has not improved? What is the problem? What is the root cause of that? The problem is that the reform is too slow. And during this reform, we are making mistakes. Suppose 2 years ago, I generally thought that we would still stay in the same place, and I wrote an article for one of the newspapers, the Mirror of the Week, Judicial Reform via Regress. But after that, everything seemed to have started moving in the right direction. And now I do believe in this reform, and that's why I have applied for this election. This is the first thing. The other cause is all about communications, bad communications. Trust in courts, trust in the judiciary has been mentioned a number of times, and it has been mentioned that it is very low. Moreover, low level of trust in the judiciary has even been reflected in the anti-corruption strategy, in the general provisions of it. It is written directly there, though it is a legislative act, that the level of trust is the lowest in the judiciary. What we lack is communication. Trust in the police now is 52%. Trust in the courts is 26%, according to the recent survey. So are policemen better than judges? Or let's rephrase it, are judges so much worse than policemen are? The point is that the success, the progress of the police is somehow shown. It is reflected in mass media. But what is shown about judges is only bad things, only failures. And let me give another example. Suppose, let's take the law on the judicial status of judges that allows the Public Integrity Council to create a portal for information collection, to collect information about judges. And everybody understands it right away that this will be negative information that could further be used during qualification assessment and during other processes. But what I would suggest is let's create at least 2 parts on this portal with positive and with negative information. And we should install some filters, because otherwise there will be some persecutions and offenses and labeling on the portal in relation to some people. But people should be able to show the real faces. And when we see that the reform is a success, suppose the High Qualification Commission has been established and this is a success story. The High Council of Justice has been established and this is a success story. New courts are established and this is a success story. Or there appears an indictment the society has, or the sentence based on the indictment or the acquittal the society has long been waiting for. Explain this and show this to the society, for the society to see success stories as well. Clear. Thank you, Mykola. And here is the next question. If we take into account your knowledge and your experience, could you try and explain
почали свою діяльність безпосередньо в цьому органі?
How you would start working in that body, newly established body? What you would change, what you would start with, what you would continue doing? What is your vision of that? Well, a lot of the candidates have already been mentioning these things. First of all, we need to take some institutional steps, which means to appoint inspectors, because otherwise we will not be able to work with them. Then we should have election to the Public Integrity Council, and then we should do the planning. We should have the schedules of parallel processes to simultaneously go forward with the procedures which have already been launched and to start the new procedures. And we should see this reflected in some schedules, in some tables. For example, we should be able to see where something correlates, where something coincides, and eliminate these coincidences in time in order to be successful in parallel in a lot of procedures. Also, we should make an inventory of all the regulatory acts produced by the previous HQCJ, the regulation, the methodology, the procedure. And I have looked through them. I actually did this about 2 weeks ago before the interview, and I saw that there were obvious mistakes there. For example, it's written that there must be 300 points that could be possibly given to the candidate, but if we make all the calculations, it appears that there are only 290 and other things. Also, it seems to me that there is differentiation between professional ethics and integrity, but it seems to me that this is one and the same thing. And this is one of the criteria for which some points are given within the scoring process. Well, if there is a division of points, we should think it over how many points could be given for what criteria. I would still prefer, and this is not just my idea, a lot of the candidates have mentioned this, I would still reserve 100 points for the interview. We should have a look at the problems available in the HQCJ for nobody to be able to accuse us later or to tell that we have created some corruption scheme. For example, in the Ministry of Defense, we have already seen that we should work in this direction. And the issue of transparency should be ensured. Everybody should understand why so many points were given to one candidate, so many points have been given to the other candidates. And I think that the selection for the Supreme Court has been not just positive but also negative, and we should learn by mistakes. For example, Roman Brahey has mentioned this, that it was not absolutely transparent, but the selection to the anti-corruption court was different, with a lot more of positive things. I actually also prepared the practical assignment for the candidates, and I also saw some minor mistakes that should be avoided. Okay, thank you, Mykola, and let me give the floor to Robert Broekhuizen.
Me? Maybe first justice, a real justice, not me.
Thank you, Mr. Broekhuizen. I appreciate that. Professor Khavroniuk, you've applied for the competition to both the high qualifications. Can you hear me? You've applied for the competition to both the HQCJ and the High Council of Justice. Do you have a sense of priority there? A sense of what you might most have liked to achieve? A sense of which of those commissions you feel you're best equipped for? Is there any sense of that kind of priority on your part? We won't take offense if it's the other one.
You actually asked some other candidates about this. That's why I'm ready with my answer. And let me tell you that since I am the representative of a civil society organization, as its representative, I understand what the interest in civil society organizations is in getting to either HQCJ or ACJ. We should not be dealing all the time with control and monitoring only as civil society or just criticize. We also need to go to some bodies and to show the results, to show how we work. If we take my colleagues from the CEO, I can name some deputy ministers, and some other top officials. In particular, during the war, I just didn't have any other option but to try and apply in order to support the state. But there is some fatalism in that. I can be equally useful and work equally well both in the HQCJ and in the HCJ. But you know that it may be the case that I get to none of them. But I think that my skills and my knowledge could be a tool in this reform. And if this tool is considered to be useful by someone, it should be used. That's it. And I've already mentioned that I do believe in this reform. I have deep trust in it, and that's why I have applied, and that's why I will stay in this process.
Are there
If I reach the final stage of the selection, and let's assume that I am within the 16 candidates, I will definitely stop applying. I will withdraw my candidacy from the selection for the HCJ because, of course, I cannot proceed with both, and otherwise you will have to fill in the vacancy here again. So that's what I cannot do, definitely.
Well, as you've indicated, you've looked at our methodology, and you see the standards, the formal standards that we've sought to apply in terms of competency and integrity. If you are placed on the HQCJ, and you think about the kind of colleagues that you want to serve with, the kind of colleagues who will be most successful in ensuring the success of the commission, are there any other kinds of informal qualifications that you think are important, things that you would urge us to look for or to avoid? I'm talking about unwritten kinds of standards in addition to the formal standards that we've set forth. Is it important that we have people with energy, for example? That's not a formal part of our methodology, but some may view that as being important, for example. Are there any other unwritten standards that you would like to see in your colleagues and that you think are important in ensuring success of the High Qualification Commission?
Well, you know, the answer is very simple. All people who want to become judges should already be judges. What do I mean by this? All documents, all their previous life, all their previous work record and the selection, all the components should actually show that they are loyal to this idea of improvement of the judiciary. And it was James Comey, he wrote in his recent book, available already on the internet, he wrote about this striving to ensure fairness and justice in this society. This striving can be seen in some people. It's just seen. I don't know whether you are making your conclusions on the basis of people's faces. I mean, what you see in the face, in the eyes. But I think that I have the skill of seeing people. And among the candidates for the HQCJ, I was rather surprised by a lot of people. By some of them, I was surprised positively, but some of them actually disappointed me. And this striving to ensure justice, and I'm sure that you remember that my colleague Roman Koibida, one of the candidates, said that this is the matter of your life, and this can be seen. You can see that this is the business of person's life, or you can also see when this is just that the person wants to change the job or to have some career growth or just interested in something. So you can recognize this. So this is an unwritten rule. I don't know whether I have really explained my idea in a proper way, but I hope that you do understand me.
No, it's a hard question. I'm catching you cold on that, but it seems to me there's two kind of candidates we have. Some have records of achievement, and we can look at those and we can assess them. Others have words, and we have to determine what lies behind those words. As you say, we look at their faces. Maybe that's a helpful thing. We look to their body language. Maybe that's a helpful thing. But what do we do when we have to rely upon words? What words impress you and what words don't impress you? What should impress us and not? Or maybe it's an impossible question.
Stephen, you know, probably I've not explained it in the proper way. Words are words, but you have a lot of other documents. So this is what I meant, that of course you rely on documents, but words is something you hear when you already know a lot about this person. You don't need to start the investigation or the interrogation of until you know more about the person you're going to interrogate than he himself knows. And you also don't start the interview until you come to learn everything about the person. When you know a person, you can correlate what is written in the motivation letter, in the CV, with what you really see. So you already have some reasonable doubt about this person, and you either dispel this doubt or you confirm this doubt during the interview.
Okay, I appreciate your answer, and again, I understand these are questions that I've put on you pretty cold, but I appreciate your counsel and your answer, and let me move to my colleague, Mr. Broekhuizen.
Good morning. Mr. Khavroniuk, sorry about my pronunciation. I will say Mykola to you if you don't mind. I've seen that I'm still older than you are, so that's. I hope you don't mind. I'm told that you also applied for a position in the National Agency of Corruption Prevention. Is that correct?
Right.
I was also told that you came out.
But that was long ago.
I also was told that you came out number 2. Is that correct?
Well, I reached the finals, and in the finals we had 8 candidates. Maybe I was number 2, but I was not told about this.
I'm told that you did not came out number 1 in any case, and that you then subsequently were offered the position of deputy in NABU. Is that correct?
I didn't get the position of the director. But actually the director then asked me to become the deputy, but I didn't agree.
And why not? Because you're a professor in criminal law. You devote your life on fighting corruption. You're a civil society guy. Is there not a better position? I don't think there's many better positions to fight corruption and to lift Ukraine to higher standards than a position so high in the NABU organization. Is that not exactly a position where a guy like you should be?
Well, I know, maybe it was my wrong decision. Maybe I even felt sorry for that decision, but that was the decision I passed back then. I was much older than the person who was the head of the NACP, and it seemed to me that this would be wrong if I agree.
But let's say that you are, let's say, elected in the HQCJ. What happens if you are not appointed chairman?
I'm not going to be disappointed with that. I will always find what to do in the HQCJ, something that I like. And by the way, I've already heard that you want another person to become the head of the chairman of the HQCJ, so I will not disagree with your choice. No, there is a lot of work in the HQCJ. There is already, there must be a delegate who participates in the work of the state's civil service. There should be some heads of chambers, secretaries of chambers, deputy chairman. So if somebody asks me to take one of these positions, I could probably agree, but I don't have this ambition to be the chairperson or something like this.
Okay. You just discussed with one of my colleagues the difficulties of the judiciary, and it has to be changed. And if I say to you that from my position, seeing all those documents and all those candidates, that if I think about it, being a long time in corruption prevention, what I see is that the judges often, are very rich and earn a lot of money, and show this money off by driving big cars and have expensive coats and jewelry or whatever. And B, they don't always abide by the rules, and then it looks like rules are for other people. And is not the real difficulty in the judiciary of Ukraine such behavior and the tone at the top? If you want to change the judiciary, shouldn't we make sure that all this behavior of showing off wealth and behaving as if rules are for other people is over?
Well, I fully agree with this statement, but I would phrase it a little bit differently. Over the recent 2 or 3 years, judges have started earning a lot. I mean, earning good salaries. But before that, they didn't have good salaries, adequate salaries. And you remember that one of the candidates even said that he even had to leave the judicial position because he had to maintain his family. And he went to work as a practicing lawyer. So back then, that was really strange because judges didn't earn a lot, and at the same time, they could be showing off with their luxury cars, apartments, traveling, and other things. Now the situation has changed a bit, but there are some ethical rules based on the UN Convention on Anti-Corruption, and these rules actually demand from judges to be samples of ethical behavior, samples to follow. So for me, this is absolutely unclear why they behave like this. If you have some extra money, you don't know what to spend it on, don't buy a new car. You can donate now to the armed forces, you can support someone. Well, there are a lot of other options to reach some self-fulfillment for yourself. Why do this?
I'm told that showing off richness and wealth is part of Ukrainian culture to show that you're successful. The question to you is it a good idea when you're a judge to show that you're successful?
Well, success is not about luxury cars. I think that this is atavism of the Soviet epoch. And it's all about the fact that the person wants to show off with his or her wealth. But the problem also is that a lot of judges and prosecutors always wanted to be doctors of law, PhD, have PhD, and they created a number of, and I'm sorry, but actually Stephen actually said that I'm the doctor of legal sciences professor, but unfortunately we have a lot of doctors of legal sciences now, and in particular among judges and prosecutors. This is the post-Soviet tradition when everybody was poor and then all of a sudden everybody started becoming richer and everybody wanted to show off that I've got this one, I've got a scholarly degree, I've got money. And that's why we have this striving to become an academician, to get the award of the honored lawyer or merited lawyer of Ukraine, or some of the awards. Well, I am also an honored lawyer. I have this award, and maybe I also got this striving once in my past. But now I'm skeptical about that, because I know that, for example, in Japan, in the Netherlands, most probably you don't have this title of honored or merited lawyer.
No, I'm certainly not honored in the Netherlands. I can say that. I have my last question to you. We are discussing gender equality a lot of time. And I've seen and noted that the majority of the applicants are male. And of course, we have female applicants as well. Of course, you know, as a professor of criminal law, that if you look at economic crimes, that the majority, nearly all economic crimes, are done by male and not by female. And that has quite some reasons, the research shows. It's not a solution that we start looking for many more females in the judiciary. So decrease the number of males and increase the number of females, that then naturally the number of crimes goes down.
Well, I think that will happen so in a natural way, but I feel sorry about that, because unfortunately a lot of our men are now dying in the front line, and therefore the war is not going to be over in the nearest future. So when we have selections for judicial positions, I think that we will mainly have female applicants. So that is anyway what will happen naturally, and we will fill the judiciary system with women. But in fact, this is good for the judiciary.
Thank you, Mr. Sarhetsin.
Professor Khavroniuk, I'm interested, firstly, in your experience with respect to the High Anti-Corruption Court. In the information you have provided to us, you provide that you participated in the development of the law on the High Anti-Corruption Court. And what was your role, and what was your, if you like, approach, the principles that you sought to have reflected in the legislation for the High Anti-Corruption Court?
So let me start with the selection and the practical assignment which I developed for the High Anti-Corruption Court. Let me explain you the way it all happened. Me and my colleagues, some other professors, associate professors, were invited to the High Qualification Commission, and we were asked to elaborate some written assignments for the selection for the High Anti-Corruption Court. We were explained how to do this and what the procedure was, and we started doing this. Well, I would say that the timeline was very short. I don't remember exactly how long we had to work, but it seems to me it was about 2 or 3 weeks of intense work. We developed the practical assignment, and it appeared that only the practical assignment I prepared was fit for this selection. Other assignments were not fit for that. It was actually a negative thing because this means that back then, and probably even now, we don't have enough people who can elaborate practical assignments. And even my practical assignment was not 100% good because I had to come a number of times to do the HQCJ after that, and we had to correct the mistakes made in my practical assignment. The other negative point about this was that it was just one practical assignment, and all the candidates had to do this task, so we were supposed to keep it in secret for no one to learn what it was about. And you know, when there is a secret, there are always some temptations to disclose these secrets in advance in somebody's interest. So when I was preparing the practical assignment for the high specialized anti-corruption prosecutor's office and for NABU, we didn't have just one practical assignment. We had several practical assignments, and the system was already different, so we learned by mistakes. There were 24 assignments, and the packet was to be opened only on the day of the exam, and it was done at random. Just the chairman of the selection commission opened the package, and that's when everybody came to learn what the number of the practical assignment was. So that was a good procedure. That's why I claim that that experience of mine was partly, but only partly, negative. As far as the draft law on the High Anti-Corruption Court of Ukraine is concerned, actually didn't mean that I'm the author of this draft law. I just mentioned that I participated in the discussion of this draft law. That's what I meant. We had a discussion concerning how to create the appeal, what institution should be the cassation institution for this court. We should, whether we should create just one court or should this court be divided into several units. And then when the law was passed, we already had to agree to what was there. But there is a very positive thing about this law. It presupposes selection with the involvement of the council, and the council has proven to be a proper one. It was, I guess, the first selection that really showed that good people of integrity and professional competence can really become members of the judiciary, and after that, court will work very effectively. And I had a chance to make sure that it really works as a clock.
That comment actually brings me to the heart of my question. That selection process, as you are well aware, I'm sure, Professor, was one of the first occasions when there was a participation of international experts in the process of selecting candidates for the High Anti-Corruption Court. Do you support that kind of approach in the present Ukrainian context?
Yes, absolutely. I think that this doesn't pose any risk to the sovereignty of Ukraine or something like this. All the more we have some experience when commercial cases in Kazakhstan, for example, are considered by a court involving some foreigners, and that's not a bad thing. The main thing is that this is determined by the law. The law has been adopted by the Verkhovna Rada, by the parliament. The parliament elected legitimately, and that is the will of the people then. Why should it be regarded as a problem? It's just a normal procedure. It's good.
And really, fundamentally, it would appear from what we read and what we hear that both the Supreme Court of Ukraine, the new Supreme Court of Ukraine, and the high anti-corruption courts, both the trial and appeal level, have an increased amount of public confidence. In other words, the selection process for those two courts appears to have resulted in a positive result, and many of the lawyers that we have spoken to in this competition have an elevated appreciation for the competence and the integrity of those two courts. You are familiar with the selection process that was involved in both courts. I'd be interested in your views as to why that and those selection processes appear to have been successful and appear to be well accepted, because, of course, both involved considerably the High Qualification Commission of Judges, and therefore there is an opportunity for lessons to be learned from the experience of the selection of judges for those two courts. So I'd be interested in some observations from you about that.
The main thing that judges were selected on the basis of the selection, and we didn't have this procedure before that, even something similar. And these selection procedures helped us involve new people for judicial positions, not from the system. We know that before that the system was filled in the wrong way. To become a judge, an individual had to be selected by the commission that was affiliated with one of the committees of the Verkhovna Rada, which means that, in fact, the legislative branch of power interfered into the work of the judiciary. And this also means that the selection process was absolutely not transparent, and all the core events were taking place behind the curtain. As far as Supreme Court and in particular High Anti-Corruption Court are concerned, we saw that the system of selection could be different, and you can really do it through a transparent selection. The Supreme Court selection, as I have already mentioned, still had some drawbacks because it was not absolutely clear how the candidates were given this or that number of scores of points. And it seems to me that there was one of the systems that was unfair. I suppose they could get 100 points for testing, 100 points for the written assignment, and that was clear. But they got much more points for something that could hardly be estimated. For example, they were supposed to be given some points for their integrity. And during the interview for the Supreme Court, you also could get a number of points. So there was some disproportion. So I think that everything should be clear there. And the rules and the methodology of the HQCJ that we currently have contain the indicator other figures or other criteria or other indicators. But following the principle of legal certainty, we cannot be using the word other indicators. What kind of other indicators? By other indicators, you can get about 100 points. But what does it mean, other indicators? That should not be the case if we follow this principle of legal certainty. And it seems to me that we should deviate from simple testing that is checking the knowledge of legislation. The question, multiple choice question, and 4 answers, and one of them is correct. Well, I think that now it's year 2023. When I went to Portugal, to their National School of Judges, that was about 15 years ago, or probably even more. And back then, I learned there that we should skip such simple questions. We should no longer have it. We should not be just checking the knowledge of the law. There should be questions checking morale, rule of law, and then you will see from the answers what their competence of the person is. So I would suggest developing new testing items. And these test items could have a multiple choice, but 3 answers may be correct. But one of them is absolutely correct. The second one will be kind of a nominal answer, checking that whether you know legislation or not. And the third one will be partially right, and the fourth will be absolutely not right. So in that way, we could be checking different sides, different aspects.
Let me interrupt you because I think we have your answer. I'll ask one more question, and that is the idea, and you are an example of the implementation of that idea. The idea that because of the huge volume of work that faces the HQCJ, it is almost a necessity that more of the HQCJ work will be contracted out to parties or institutions outside of the HQCJ. And I say you are an example of that because, of course, you prepared the practical task for the High Anti-Corruption Court competition. And that is an example for me of contracting out. Do you agree with that idea in the present circumstances? And if so, if you could concisely suggest what aspects of the HQCJ work might additionally engage outside contractors.
The so-called outsourcing, yes. Well, here, that is again the experience I gained in Portugal. Back then, I was kind of frustrated that the High Qualification Commission of Judges and the National School of Judges are so small. And I asked them, and how are you doing your job? And they said that, okay, we just involve university professors. So with us, this is a problem because we don't have a pool of such professors, associate professors who will be involved on a regular basis. Because if they are involved on a regular basis, this would mean that they know how to develop test items, how to develop practical assignments, how to do training of judges. With us, everything is rather more chaotic. For example, I'm given a call from the National School of Judges, and they tell me, Mykola, we would like to have a training for judges, and we wanted to invite you. And please, if you could recommend anybody else. That's not the way it should be done. There must be a pool, a register of university lecturers who could be providing such services, and there should be hundreds of university lecturers there with their majorings, their specialization indicated there.
Excuse me, Professor. You're getting into far more detail than I had hoped you would. What are the tasks? I'm not interested in the reasoning behind it. I expect you have good reasons. Are there any other tasks other than the participation in the examination process that you think might be outsourced?
Well, I wonder whether I can enumerate them. I think that this refers to a lot of elements. even development of regulatory acts could be outsourced. I mean the acts that are issued by the HQCJ, and that we have some experience like this. When the State Bureau, Investigation Bureau of NABU were being established, the Council of Europe, if I'm not mistaken, announced a competition for experts to prepare all the documents for those new bodies. So this was outsourcing. That can be done. Also, well, some other elements, but probably I'm not ready at the moment to enumerate them. I would also deal with the legal standpoints of the Supreme Court processing of this information, because it seems to me that the Supreme Court is not yet coping with this function, and I'm already tired of looking at different digests to find the information you need. And there is, by the way, another important element, digitalization. This could also be outsourced. And I can give you the example of our writing the criminal code over the recent 3 years when we involved an IT
Excuse
guy.
me, Professor. I don't want to take too much of our time. I'm going to interrupt you, and I'm going to turn you over to my colleague, Judge Mizentsev. I'm sure he has a question or two as well.
Sure, thank you, Justice. Доброго дня, пане Миколо.
Good morning, Mykola. First of all, I'd like to thank you for participating in our selection. And with great interest, I read your motivational letter, and I found this curious term there: the solidarity within the judicial community. I've never come across this kind of term in any other papers or in mass media, and you say that this is something that we have to fight, the kind of solidarity that judges have within their community. So what would you suggest to overcome this type of solidarity, that judges support each other? And how do we find the right balance between a healthy desire to have a good relationship within your team and to discuss problems and issues with your colleagues, and on the other hand, how do we balance that with different negative manifestations within the judiciary? Well, when I was talking about this kind of solidarity, I meant the example of the previous HQCJ even, because as you remember, we had 10 judges there and 6 non-judges on the commission, and the 10 judges always voted in the same way, and it was really easy to override the veto, which sometimes they wanted to do with regards to PIC opinions. And I think that in view of my rather mature age and the fact that I'm coming from a civil society organization in a way, I will be able to create this bridge between the judges and the representatives of civil society. And I'm talking about the PIC here. I will try to reconcile them in situations when it appears impossible. Thank you. Your position is clear. I have no doubts that you will be performing your duties in a duly manner, regardless of the position you occupy. But I'm asking you a more general question. So, how do we fight this conspiracy of silence when judges support each other? So, what could the safeguards be in this situation? So, let's look at a very broad context, not about you specifically, not about a specific court. So, what could we do to solve this problem? We need to talk to the society to explain the problems existing, to explain what decisions are made. We need to involve the civil society at all times. There is no PIC by the High Council of Justice, but we can even try and have a PIC for them as well. And we must be having some open meetings. We must explain why we're doing things in the way we're doing them. So if there's any kind of problem, it must be demonstrated, and that's the first step on the way to solve it. And I think that the society will be understanding of that. So the more openness, the less we have of these conspiracies of silence. Thank you. So I've been pondering over this question for a long time, and I like discussing it with people who I respect, as specialists who are fighting corruption. But I've already asked this question to some of the other candidates, but still I'm going to ask it as well. So how can we prevent the deterioration of the quality of new judges when they work within the team of old judges, when the new judges who occupy their positions and initially are good, with time become worse and start tolerating corruption? How can we solve this problem in the long-term perspective? How can we prevent this situation when we have good judges turning into bad? First of all, we need to solve the problem with the administrative positions within courts. When I visited a court in Germany, it happened in a year when they were deciding on how we were supposed to elect presidents of courts in Ukraine. So I met the president of that court in Germany and asked him about their responsibilities. So that person looked at me in a rather sly way, and he told me that his responsibility was to meet me because I was coming and I was a guest. And that was the only difference. The second solution is that when we have the new judges occupy their positions, they will in a way dilute the environment. These people will already share our ideas of integrity, and those old judges probably will feel ashamed and afraid to go on with their previous kinds of illegal or bad behavior. And number 3, we need to stop any kind of manipulations with the automatic distribution of case assignment, so that some cases are distributed to one and the same judge all the time. And number 4, everything will be solved with time. And here we need to work with the law enforcement. We need to look at the qualification assessment of judges. When all the judges completed, we will already see the result, because some of the judges have not yet completed their assessment. And we'll have the number of judges completing it higher. I think that all of these things combined in several years will result in something positive. Yes, thank you. So, according to your individual conviction or belief, when should the judicial reform stop? What should be the event that will mark the end to this reform? And could you please give us at least a tentative timeline? I really hope that in 4 years, we'll already get the first positive results. but it's only on condition that the HQCJ, HCJ, the Supreme Court, the State Court Administration all work in accord, in coordination. As far as the end of the reform in general is concerned, I don't think we'll have it in the near future. I'm dreaming of the times when we'll have HQCJ and HCJ all as one body, when we'll have the opportunity for the judges and prosecutors to apply for the same selections, and then, as it happens in Germany, to be transferred from one position to another, so you can be transferred from the position of a prosecutor to the position of a judge, for example. When we have the single uniform national school of judges and prosecutors, because the school has different curriculums to those institutions that train prosecutors, for example. And if we are having a judicial reform, that means the reform of courts, and we must have a general legal reform. We must also reform the law enforcement bodies, the prosecutors' offices. We must have reforms of our legal education, among other things. And as a result, we'll have the completion of the reform. Thank you, Mykola. And finally, I have one more question for you. It has to do with the political background. We are always asking these questions, and we are trying to discuss them with our candidates. So in your motivational letter, you mentioned that during the Soviet times, and it was quite a long time ago, some 30 years ago, for some time you were a member of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. You mentioned that it was impossible to work in the court or at the prosecutor's office without being a member of the party that was the only party existing back in the day. So what is the Communist Party for you? Was it just an opportunity to hold some positions, or did you share some of the concepts and values of that party? So you are referring to the past, not to the present, of course. Yes, yes. So did you share the values back then? I'm always striving to reach some ideals, and maybe at the time I was sharing those best things that the communist ideology had, the striving for a fair society. But of course, with time, I got disappointed in that ideology. I realized that the Communist Party was not what it claimed to be. And when I joined the party, I was 22 years old, and I was told that it was impossible to work at the military court without being a party member. But in the end, I did not get that position at the military court, and I started working as an investigator. So this is actually me answering your question. Thank you, Mykola. I'm passing the floor to our chair, Ivan. You're welcome. Thank you.
Пане Микола, ви коли спілкувалися
Mykola,
з моїм колегою Робертом,
when talking to my
ви
colleague
сказали, що
Robert,
ця комісія
you
намітила
mentioned
іншого голову
that
ВККС.
this commission had a different idea about who the chair of HQCJ is going to be. So I would kindly ask you to refrain from such statements, because we are not having any ideas about chairs. We have not yet formed the list, the short list of those candidates that will be further transferred to HCJ, because we are still in the process of having interviews. So even if you mentioned it as a joke, so please try to refrain from making such statements.
Я впевнений, ви знаєте, хто такий Роман Ващук.
I'm sure you know who Roman Vashchuk is. That's the former Canadian ambassador to Ukraine.
Після того, як він вже закінчив свою дипломатичну
After
місію, він
he
написав таку велику програму
stopped
статті.
his diplomatic mission, he
Чи це
wrote
була
this
лекція, яку записали,
long
на
article, or
тему
maybe
того,
it was a lecture of
чому, на
his
його погляд,
that was
віддалися
put in
реформи.
writing, and there he
На
said
його конкретний погляд.
what his ideas
Він
about the failed
розбив
reforms
там на
were.
10
So
тез.
there were some 10 statements in that article, and statement number 3 goes as following: anti-corruption above all rather than the rule of law.
Зараз я його зацитую.
And let me cite his words.
Стосовно Кодексу до Верховного суду, він сказав
So with regards to the Supreme Court, he said, an unprecedented and transparent selection to the Supreme Court did take place. You could see all the interviews on the internet. You could watch the broadcast. And the HQCJ had to listen to the recommendations of PIC with regards to each candidate. The PIC were activists and journalists who had the right to provide their remarks and recommendations. And this did not happen in any other countries of the world, as far as I know. But the HQCJ did not agree to the recommendations provided by PIC and said that it was impossible to take those concerns into account because they were not completely motivated or proven. So the PIC started the war against HQCJ and said that the new Supreme Court was corrupt and bad because it did not take into account all of the recommendations of the PIC. They considered only half of them. And the Supreme Court, chaired by Ms. Danishevska, was rejected in the public perception because they had only 70% and not 100% of new absolutely positive people. So do you agree with this statement made by the former ambassador? Probably partly, or rather largely. So, this is the first statement in which he says that it's a reform of Bolshevism. He says that if we don't have 100% of positive result, then it means betrayal. So one of the candidates within this selection, with regards to civil activists and members of PIC, used this word, which is maximalism. And this maximalism is really there. I do agree. But is it justified? Yes, it is justified. It is justified because it's like a pendulum. It moves from the left to the right. But if it stops moving, it will just stop and nothing will happen. So, I sometimes go to Facebook and I intentionally try to get some kind of response from people. So I'm trying to provoke to get the response that I want. And maybe this maximalism plays a positive role because it does give a realization that both sides can be wrong. And maybe as a result, we need to find some rational conclusion. Thank you. One more question with regards to your motivation. So you are participating in several selections at the same time, as far as I understand. Just in 2 selections. And before that, you participated in some selections. I hope that our selection is a priority for you. Is that true? So, you're asking a very difficult question, putting me at a dead end. If I say yes, it will mean that I'm trying to pay you compliments. If I say no, then it means that I don't respect you. So you already mentioned that I was disrespectful at the very beginning, so I don't want to do anything wrong once again. So I will not be answering this question.
Але все ж таки, уявімо собі, що
But still, let's imagine that you were selected in both selections. Now, that cannot happen. I've already told you that if I'm elected by this selection commission, I will withdraw my candidacy from the other selection.
Бо все ж таки, ми ж з вами розуміємо, що ВРП це конституційно.
We understand that HQCJ is a constitutional body, but the HQCJ is also really important. A lot depends on it. There is no big difference for me. I see myself as an instrument for reforms, and this instrument can be used in both places, actually. Thank you.
Чи будуть ще запитання до...
Do we have any additional questions to Mr. Khavroniuk?
Пане Микола, наша співбесіда добігає
Mykola, your
кінця.
interview is coming to an end.
Ви скільки? 25 співбесід, да, ви казали?
So you've watched some 25 interviews, so you're probably aware that it's up to the candidate to summarize their interview. So you're welcome. What are some of the important things you'd like to tell us towards the end? So all the candidates addressed somebody in their concluding remarks, so I will do the same. The most important things I would like to do within this reform is for us not to have the situation repeated when we didn't have an HQCJ for 3 years. And we didn't have an HCJ for a year, so it would be nice for the lawmaker to think of a mechanism in which one of the institutions could assume the responsibilities of the other, or when we could have some reserve members on each of those commissions and councils. So with regards to me watching the 25 interviews, what conclusions have I made for myself? We have a lot of worthy candidates. And if I may, I would like to provide this allegory. The king ordered the ship to sail around the globe for 4 years. And there are 36 crew members on the ship. The ship is in the dock. There's a storm. The storm is really serious. And for 4 years, the ship is sailing. And one of the 2 lifeboats that the ship had was lost. And 16 people had to go back to the shore. And the other 16 continued with the sailing. So during the selection, I heard that you are supposed to recommend 32 and you don't know who the final 16 are going to be. So I'm asking you to select those 32 who are the best, who are passionate about justice. There should be all the 32 candidates who are like that. Thanks a lot. This is the end of your interview. Thank you for participation. All the best to you. Take care and goodbye. Goodbye. Thank you.